So thank you everybody for being here and to the organizers for this session. I think this talk ties in actually really well with the last two. And I'll emphasize some of the societal impacts of the work that we are talking about. What I'll share with you today is mostly work focused on local decision making on unconventional oil and gas development, commonly known as fracking. And I want to focus on two aspects of it, the regulatory environment and so the regulatory environment around it and the scientific landscape around it. Again, focusing much more at a local level, which is town, city, municipality, county level. And this is work that we've been doing with our partners at the Consensus Building Institute, so I want to acknowledge them. So before I get into the details of the regulatory and information landscape, why are we even talking about fracking, right? Why has it become such a contentious issue? Why are people so concerned about it? And why is there such a hot public debate about it? And I thought this graph really demonstrates some of the reasons why it has become such a hot button issue. So this is data showing the exponential and really very steep incline in shale gas production in the US. And if I showed you a graph of oil production, shale oil production, it would look exactly the same. It has a very steep curve starting right around 2007. And what's really enabled this rapid expansion in oil and gas production is advancement in the technology of drilling. So as compared to just a vertical drilling technique to get to pools of oil and gas, what the real development here is horizontal, is the directional drilling and followed by hydraulic fracturing, which requires injection of millions of gallons of water mixed with chemicals, and that helps open fissures into very tight rock formations. And I think some of the conversation, the reason for the polarization and the debate around fracking is the pace of development of oil and gas really has outpaced the regulatory environment and the scientific information that we have on the various impacts of fracking. So when I'm talking about impacts, it's not just the process of drilling, but also all the steps that lead up to the preparation of the site, but also the subsequent steps that are involved in fuel processing and transportation. And at the Union of Concerned Scientists, we've been emphasizing how we have to be considerate about the suite of impacts that result from oil and gas development. So let's first talk about the regulatory environment surrounding this. In 2005, there was an Energy Policy Act which really helped the oil and gas industry won major exemptions from, for some of the key federal environmental laws. And these include laws like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the National Energy Policy Act. And as a result of this, the authority of regulating fracking was really delegated to the states. And I wanted to use one example to demonstrate how there is a real patchwork of regulation when it comes at the state level. So if we look at how different states all across the country require disclosure of fracking fluids, of chemicals that go into fracking fluids, what we see is that it's all over the map, literally, right? So we have 14 states that require disclosure. There's one state that requires disclosure with some exemptions. There are other states that have proposed requirements. There are a subset of states that have no evidence of any regulation that's required. So it's really a patchwork of regulation at the state level. And as a consequence of it, what the oil and gas industry is doing is reporting, voluntarily reporting the chemicals that they're using in fracking fluid on a website called FracFocus, which itself has come under fire because of the lack of usability of the way reporting takes place here, and also a real lack of enforcement or compliance through this. So let's shift gears a little bit to talk about what the regulatory environment then looks like at the very local level. So I showed you what happens at the state level. So at the local level, what we found, and this is the work really that we've been doing with the Consensus Building Institute, we've held focus groups in lots of different, where we brought together people from lots of different states, such as California, Colorado, Texas, North Dakota, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And we asked local decision makers about what are some of the big barriers and challenges that they face when they're thinking about whether they should have oil and gas development in their localities, and if so, how should they regulate it? And one of the first things the biggest challenge that we found is an underappreciation of the kinds of regulatory and non-regulatory tools that are available to decision makers. So most of you've probably heard about bans and moratoriums, but there are also a lot of other tools that local decision makers can use. And these include permitting, zoning requirements, memorandum of understanding, which local officials can sign not only with oil and gas industry, but also with their state officials. And there's just not a good understanding of what are the different tools to be deployed here. There's also a division within each community in support of or in opposition of industry. So if you're talking to a local decision maker, they don't have a homogeneous picture of what their community wants. Their residents are split along the lines of whether they want development or not. There's also really a big challenge of what the state authority is and how that affects what the local authority is. So some of you have probably heard about home rule and how expansive are the powers at a local level. And finally, there's also, in terms of regulatory landscape itself, there's a fragmented nature of the easement and rights acquisition. So who owns surface rights, who owns minerals, subsurface rights, and what is the capacity of local officials to override some of the state powers. And then there's the nature of the industry itself. There is a high rate of entry and exit of oil and gas industry in a lot of localities. We're seeing fracking take place in areas that had never seen development before, so that it also exposes communities to very new and different kinds of risks. Plus, the kinds of actors that are in the oil and gas development are also very varied. They are multiple large and small players, and they have their own culture of safety, their own culture of compliance, or lack thereof. And then finally, when we're talking about the local level, which is municipal, city, town, council, county level, there's just a real lack of resources in terms of time, staff, and funding to be able to develop rules and regulations, but then also to implement them and to enforce them. So shifting gears to the information landscape on fracking, this is work we did last year. We produced a comprehensive report on what do we know and don't know about fracking. And one of the pieces we looked at, where are people turning to when they want more information on fracking? And what we found is something that you'd expect, that people are not relying on one specific source of information. They are turning to industry, to media, nonprofits, academia, government, and most importantly, their friends and family. They want to know what others trust and what others are looking at. This was, there's another follow-up report from NPR's State Impact Series, and they found similarly that people rely on a lot of different kinds of sources of information. And they ranked the kinds of information that people look at. So at top was newspapers, second was natural gas industry, and then you can see through the list how they rank different information sources. But more interesting to me was they also ranked the way people trust these different sources of information. And what you see right away is where people get information from doesn't directly align with the kinds of information they trust. And given the audience here, I want to point out that I think we can be heartened by the fact that people trust university professors. They rank them as number one. But I think it also should give us pause that the source of information, university professors are actually second from the bottom. So there are some things that we can all do to change that. So again, this was much more at a national level, looking at a more local decision-making, information challenges. What we found were that more information is actually not necessarily better, right? So where the information is coming from is as important as what that information is. The science and technology around unconventional oil and gas development itself is complex and ever-evolving. And really, sometimes the information that you need doesn't even exist, particularly during the time of decision-making. And a lot of studies that have been funded on fracking have been funded by industry, but that also raises the questions of the legitimacy and bias of these studies. And that also points to the fact that we don't have a whole lot of meaningful funding streams for independent research. All this comes together to result in an environment, information landscape, where we don't really have a whole lot of baseline data, and we don't have ongoing monitoring data to really gauge impacts of oil and gas development. And finally, there's the human impact, right? The human component here, that people pay attention to risks that might be low frequency, high impact, as opposed to risks which actually are mundane but much more important, such as socioeconomic impacts. So I'll just briefly talk about some of the work that the Union of Concerned Scientists is doing on this. We've developed a fracking information toolkit, which we hope will help communities identify the critical issues in their community, navigate the policy process, assess scientific information, and together use that information to advance and inform public decision on fracking. We've also been writing in national outlets, such as the Issues in Science and Technology, to raise attention to some of the federal loopholes on fracking, as well as the need for data collection. And finally, bringing it all back to the local level, what we think is that there is a need for science to provide locally relevant data, and we heard about that in our previous presentations. There's also a great desire among local officials to share and access existing data, as well as to share resources amongst themselves. Local officials told us that really the kind of information they trust is when they can go do site visits and talk to community members directly. And they pointed to the importance of having a liaison, an intermediary that can really serve the role of a translator between industry, the scientific community, and decision makers. And finally, the need for engaging local universities, extension programs, and scientists. And I think this is sort of a call to action for people in the audience. And what we've been doing some of this work in Colorado, as well as in California, where we are connecting scientists with decision makers. Thank you for your attention.